Welcome to my YouTube channel, Truth Untold Story. Which country are you watching this video from? If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell for more emotional stories every day. Millionaire boss meets orphaned twins in hospital. Then everything changes. Alexander Reid rose at 4:30 every morning, not a minute late. By 5 a.m., he was already on his second espresso, eyes scanning global markets like a hawk watching prey. His personal trainer arrived at 5:15, exactly 45 minutes of HIIT, no excuses. At 6 a.m., he was in the shower, steam fogging up the marble mirrors of his 12th floor penthouse suite. He dressed in tailored suits, hand-stitched in Milan. Navy, charcoal, or jet black. Nothing else. By 6:45, his car, a sleek black Maybach, was waiting downstairs. The driver never spoke. Reid preferred silence. It sharpened his focus. His assistant would already be emailing him from the back seat, reviewing the day's packed itinerary. There was no room for delays, no room for emotion. That was his unbreakable code. His empire, Reid Tech Industries, dominated the world of artificial intelligence and defense software. Nations negotiated with him, presidents requested meetings, competitors feared him. He didn't build his fortune through kindness. He built it with discipline, detachment, and an iron will. To his board, he was a visionary. To his employees, a tyrant. To himself, just efficient. His office, located in a glass tower overlooking the city skyline, was as precise as he was. Not a single pen out of place. Not a smudge on the floor-to-ceiling windows. He didn't eat lunch. He didn't take breaks. He only allowed one luxury: silence and control. Meetings moved like machines under his direction. He could dismantle a poor pitch in seconds with a slight raise of an eyebrow or a single cold remark. No one dared interrupt him. No one dared disappoint him. He had no patience for personal stories or small talk. Despite being surrounded by people all day, Alexander Reid was utterly alone. He liked it that way, at least that's what he told himself. His calendar was full, but his evenings were hollow. A personal chef prepared gourmet dinners he rarely tasted. His penthouse was filled with modern art, untouched wine, and endless silence. The only sound at night was the soft hum of city traffic and the echo of his own footsteps. There were no family photos, no pets, no signs that anyone else had ever lived there. He'd had relationships, brief, strategic, always ending before they could become a distraction. His mother had passed 10 years ago. His father, long gone before that. He never spoke of childhood. He never revisited memories. Everything personal stayed buried, locked away under layers of concrete ambition. Love, grief, friendship, all replaced with power, order, and a ruthless sense of purpose. Then came the hospital event. His PR director had begged him to attend. "We need the human touch, sir." Photographers waited at the entrance. A red ribbon ceremony had been staged. He stood in front of cameras, smiled tightly, cut the ribbon, shook a few hands. His face betrayed none of the boredom he felt, none of the unease brewing beneath his calm exterior. After the speeches, he was given a short tour of the new charity wing, funded partly by his company. Clean walls, bright lights, cheerful murals, designed to look less like a hospital, more like a dream. He nodded politely, checked his watch too often, thought about his next call with Tokyo. As far as he was concerned, the event was already over. But as he turned a corner, about to leave, something unexpected happened. A faint sound caught his ear. Not the chatter of staff, not the beeping of machines, something softer, a muffled sob. Then another, childlike, fragile. His footsteps slowed. His heart did something strange, something unfamiliar. Through the open door of a pediatric room, he caught a glimpse. Two small girls, sitting silently on a single hospital bed, clutching each other tightly. Identical, pale, their eyes puffy from crying, their faces blank with sorrow. They didn't see him. Or maybe they did but didn't care. Something inside him faltered, just for a moment. He stood frozen in the hallway, unsure why he hadn't walked on. A nurse approached. Noticing his hesitation, she whispered, "They lost their parents. A car crash. No other family." Her voice was soft. His chest tightened, but he said nothing. He turned and walked away, his shoes clicking down the polished corridor. But that night, in his glass tower high above the city, he couldn't concentrate. The faces of the girls haunted him, not because of pity. He didn't believe in pity. It was something deeper, something he couldn't name. And for the first time in years, Alexander Reid didn't feel powerful. He felt something else. He should have left. The car was waiting outside, his assistant already texting updates about an international investor call. The security detail looked at him, puzzled. He never lingered. But his feet wouldn't move. The image of the two girls clung to him like smoke. He stepped closer to the pediatric room's glass door. Muted lights spilled from the hallway, casting soft shadows across the white-tiled floor. Inside, the girls sat motionless, their little frames nearly swallowed by the oversized hospital bed. They looked like porcelain dolls, fragile, breakable, too quiet for children that young. One of them leaned her head gently on the other's shoulder. They didn't cry now. They didn't talk. They just sat there, hands intertwined. The silence was deafening. It wasn't the kind of silence Alex was used to, the kind he enjoyed. This silence screamed loss, screamed confusion, screamed a kind of, "They've been here for a week." Car accident. Their parents didn't survive. No known relatives. Her eyes lowered as she added, "They haven't spoken a single word since." Alex didn't know what to say. He was a man of action, of numbers and logic, not sympathy or soft words. But in that moment, none of his usual responses felt appropriate. He simply nodded, eyes still fixed on the children. The nurse didn't try to explain further. She seemed to understand his silence. She touched his elbow briefly and left him standing there, still and strange in his own skin. Then it happened. One of the twins lifted her head and looked directly at him. Just a glance. No words, no movement, just her eyes meeting his. He wasn't prepared for it. Her stare wasn't filled with fear or hope. There was no pleading in it. It was empty, a quiet vacancy, like the lights had gone out behind her eyes. Something in that look pierced him, sharper than any insult he'd ever received in a boardroom. He took a single step toward the door, unsure why. He had no plan, no reason to be there, but his body moved before his brain could intervene. The girl didn't flinch. She simply watched him, unreadable, her tiny hands still gripping her sister's. It was as if she was daring him to look away first. For the first time in years, Alexander Reid felt his confidence buckle, not in the face of failure or risk, but under the weight of a child's silence. He couldn't recall the last time someone looked at him without expectation. No praise, no fear, no calculation. Just raw, unfiltered existence. His mouth opened slightly as if to say something. But what could he say? "I'm sorry. I understand." He didn't. Not really. Still, something in him ached to speak, to reach out, to change what couldn't be changed. Instead, he stood frozen, powerless in a way he had never known. Her eyes didn't leave his. They held him captive, pulling him deeper into something he couldn't define. He thought of the deals he'd closed that day, the money he'd made, the praise he'd earned. None of it felt real anymore. None of it mattered, standing there in front of that room. He shifted his weight, feeling suddenly uncomfortable in his own skin. His heart, so long ignored, thudded uncomfortably in his chest. The hospital hallway, once just another polished corridor, now felt sacred, like he'd stepped into a place where numbers and control meant nothing. A nurse walked by and whispered a polite question about whether he needed anything. He shook his head, barely noticing her presence. His eyes were still locked on the small, solemn face behind the glass. He hadn't realized he was holding his breath. The second twin, he thought of the loneliness that waited for them after the hospital. Orphanages, foster homes, strangers. They didn't belong in that world. They looked too small, too lost. But then again, he didn't belong here either. The girl blinked slowly, and for just a second, the emptiness in her eyes flickered. Something softened, something stirred. It was as if she saw through him, not the CEO, not the billionaire, but the man beneath it all. And that was what unraveled him most. He finally looked away, breaking the silent connection. It felt like tearing a thread that had barely started to form. He turned and walked toward the elevator, each step heavier than the last. But that gaze, the one that had silenced him, followed him into the night. And he knew, as the elevator doors closed behind him, that he would never be the same again. The city glittered beneath his penthouse windows, a skyline he usually admired. But that night, the lights meant nothing. He stood in the dark, staring out, hands in his pockets, tie loosened but forgotten. The girl's eyes, still so fresh in his memory, had carved a space in him he didn't know existed. He didn't eat dinner, didn't check his emails. For once, the stock tickers scrolling across his wall screens didn't matter. He sat on the edge of his bed, elbows on his knees, a man unrecognizable to himself. Sleep didn't come, only ghosts. Visions of his own childhood seeped through the silence. A cracked window in a one-room apartment, a mattress on the floor, his mother's worn hands counting coins for bread, the hollow ache of waiting by the door for a father who never returned. He had spent years building walls, discipline, wealth, power, anything to forget. But now, those walls were trembling. The twins had reminded him of that look, his own, once, in a mirror too high to reach, a child's look that said, "Don't bother, no one's coming for you." Somewhere around 4 a.m., he finally moved, pulled on a sweater, picked up his car keys. His assistant would panic if she knew, but he didn't care. There was only one place he wanted to be. The hospital lobby was quiet. When he arrived, he spoke to the night staff, who blinked in confusion at the sight of the infamous CEO. But they let him in. Something in his eyes must have explained what words couldn't. He walked alone down the now familiar hallway, his footsteps softer this time. He didn't wake the girls, he just stood at the door for a while, watching them sleep, curled beside each other. They looked peaceful, safer. He left quietly, but promised himself he'd return. And he did. The next morning, he arrived with bags, soft blankets in pastel colors, coloring books with sparkling covers, a plush rabbit with ears too long. He placed the gifts gently on the table beside their bed and sat in the corner chair. They didn't speak, didn't smile, but they noticed. He returned the next day, and the day after. Meetings were rescheduled, calls went unanswered. His assistant left a dozen voicemails asking where he was. He ignored every one. At first, the twins remained distant. They accepted the gifts, but didn't reach for him. But he kept showing up. Never pushing, just being there. Sometimes reading aloud from children's books, his voice awkward but warm. One morning, Lily, the quieter of the two, tugged gently at his sleeve. She handed him a crayon drawing. two stick girls, and a tall figure beside them. His heart clenched. He framed it later that evening. Emma, more guarded, tested him in other ways. She'd turn her face away when he spoke, refusing to engage. But she let him braid her hair once, carefully, while her sister napped. That braid unraveled hours later, but something else held firm. He laughed once, genuinely, when Lily called his suit itchy. The staff noticed the change. He started smiling more, talking less about business. He even helped one of the nurses rearrange a bookshelf in the playroom. Meanwhile, his board of directors grew restless. There were rumors. Is he burned out? Is he distracted? One executive confronted him gently. "We've missed you at 3 strategy briefings this week." Alex stared back and said only, "I had somewhere more important to be." They didn't understand. He didn't expect them to. The truth was simple. He had become someone different in that room. Not a tycoon, not a strategist, just a man, slowly remembering how to feel. The twins weren't his, not yet, but he was beginning to feel like he belonged to them. Every soft glance they gave him, every cautious smile, chipped away at the man he used to be. And for the first time in decades, he didn't want to rebuild that armor. By the 3rd week, the nurses no longer asked why Alex Reid was there. He had a rhythm now. He'd show up by 9, sometimes earlier, with a coffee in one hand and a storybook in the other. His suits grew softer, his eyes less guarded. The twins greeted him differently now. Lily would run, her arms wide and hopeful, while Emma waited at the edge of the bed, cautious but no longer afraid. They didn't talk much, but they didn't need to. Children have their own language, and Alex was learning it. He learned how to braid hair without tugging, how to cut apples into thin slices, just like Mom used to. He learned the names of every stuffed animal and which one needed to sleep on the left side of the pillow. He even learned the lullabies, humming softly when the lights dimmed. Nurses noticed how Emma clung to him. He began checking his phone less. He missed an important tech conference and didn't care. What mattered now wasn't the rising market shares, it was the rise in Lily's laughter, the glow returning to Emma's eyes. They were healing, so was he. One evening, after story time, Emma dozed off mid-sentence. Alex stayed in the chair beside her, watching her chest rise and fall. Lily was already asleep, curled under a blanket he had brought from his penthouse. He sat there for an hour, unmoving, a peace settling over him he didn't fully understand. The next day, a nurse approached him gently. She held a clipboard, eyes downcast. "I thought you should know. The twins are scheduled for transfer next week, to a group home outside the city." The words hit him like a blow. Transfer. A word so sterile, so bureaucratic, and yet it cracked something inside him. A state-run orphanage, shared rooms, rotating caregivers. The thought of them being there, scared and alone again, turned his stomach. He didn't speak right away, just nodded, tight-lipped. But when he left that night, he didn't go home. He drove aimlessly for hours, the city lights blurring behind his windshield. Thoughts swirled, doubt, fear, and something else far more terrifying, love. He had never pictured himself as a father. He didn't know how to braid a proper French plait or soothe a nightmare with the right words. He had empires, not bedtime routines. But when he thought of the twins in that orphanage, something inside him snapped. By morning, he was parked in front of his lawyer's office, waiting before the lights even came on. He didn't bother calling first. When his attorney arrived, bleary-eyed and surprised, Alex simply said, "I want to adopt them." His voice didn't waver. He expected pushback. He got it. "You have no parenting experience, Alex. The system won't make this easy." "I don't care," he said. "I won't let them go." The paperwork was thick. Background checks, home inspections, psychological evaluations. He didn't blink. Every form signed, every question answered. He rescheduled an international merger meeting just to meet with the social worker. At the hospital, he didn't tell the girls right away. He didn't want to promise something that wasn't yet certain. But Lily started calling him Daddy when she thought he couldn't hear, and Emma had begun to fall asleep only once his hand was in hers. The nurses were the first to notice. They started referring to him as Dad in passing, half-jokingly, until the joke began to stick. Doctors smiled when he arrived, often stepping aside as if they knew his presence mattered more than medicine. He had become more than a visitor. He was theirs now. His assistant, confused by the sudden shift but the moment it was filed, the storm began. Not from the girls, but from the world around him. Social services weren't impressed by his net worth. They didn't care that he had private jets or a penthouse view. They saw a man who had spent decades chasing profits, not playgrounds. A workaholic CEO adopting 2 grieving children? One report questioned. Is it for publicity? The scrutiny intensified. News headlines erupted. Tech tycoon's unexpected bid to become a father. Some called it noble, others called it a stunt. Cameras began showing up outside the hospital. Reporters demanded statements. His board of directors was alarmed. We've got 3 acquisitions pending, one executive said. Our stock is dipping, Alex. This could scare off investors. He looked up from a sketch Lily had drawn. Let it dip. There were meetings he never attended again. Instead, he was attending parenting seminars in modest classrooms, surrounded by people half his salary and twice his experience. He took notes, asked questions, stayed after class. He even learned how to assemble a toddler bed, just in case. He hired a nanny, not for luxury, but for support, a gentlewoman named Rosa, with years of foster experience and a warm smile that put the girls at ease. He asked her to live in temporarily to help them transition if the adoption went through. She accepted, touched by the tenderness in his request. Still, the officials weren't convinced. They visited his home, poked into drawers, asked invasive questions. How will you balance business and parenting? With a calendar, patience, and love, he replied. The waiting dragged on. Weeks of interviews, background checks, home studies. Emma started sleeping with one eye open again. Lily stopped drawing. They had begun to fear losing him. But Alex remained unshaken. Every evening, he came with his briefcase in one hand and Emma in the other. He took them on walks in the hospital garden, played board games on the floor, brushed tangles out of their hair without a single complaint. He told them bedtime stories he made up on the spot. Stories where twin princesses saved the kingdom. When social workers came to observe, they saw more than affection. They saw familiarity, safety, a rhythm built over months. The twins weren't just attached, they had rooted themselves in him, and he in them. Then came the final hearing. A long, polished courtroom, lawyers in suits, clipboards, files, sealed folders. Alex sat between his attorney and Rosa, heart racing for the first time in years. The judge, a stern woman with gentle eyes, asked all the usual questions. Do you understand the responsibility you're taking on? Yes. Are you prepared for the emotional needs these children will... Silence fell. The kind that presses on chests and slows time. Lily glanced nervously at her sister. Emma looked down, then up at the judge. Her voice was barely audible. He's not Mr. Reid. He's our daddy. Someone in the courtroom gasped. A lawyer sniffled. The clerk wiped his eyes. Even the judge paused, blinking quickly. Then she smiled. Then I think it's time to make it official. The gavel fell. One sharp knock, and the whole world changed. Alex didn't cheer. He didn't cry. Not yet. He simply reached for the girls as they ran into his arms, their small bodies crashing against him like waves. For the first time, they weren't just three people finding each other, they were a family. 12 months passed, quietly, beautifully, completely unlike any year Alex had ever known. He still wore suits, but now they had cookie crumbs on the lapels. His mornings no longer began with news tickers, but with sleepy voices asking, "Can we have pancakes?" The penthouse sat empty, collecting dust and echoes. Instead, he lived in a 3-bedroom house nestled on a quiet street with a swing in the backyard. There were toys on the stairs, drawings taped to the fridge, and soft music drifting from the girls' room at bedtime. Alexander Reid, once the face of ruthless ambition, had become a man who packed lunchboxes. He now had glitter in his briefcase and spelling words scribbled on his whiteboard next to market charts. He wasn't softer, he was fuller. Richer in ways that didn't show up in quarterly reports. The office lights dimmed earlier now. His assistant had learned no calls after 5. Even his executive team adapted, learning to schedule around ballet class and teacher meetings. What once would have been viewed as weakness had turned into respect. "He's different," they whispered, not in a hushed, wary way, but with admiration. Because Alex hadn't stepped away from his empire, he simply redefined what power looked like. And sometimes, real strength meant being home in time for bedtime stories. On the girls' first day of school, he stood in the driveway, waving until the bus turned the corner. He stayed there a moment longer, hands in his pockets, the morning sunlight washing over him. It was the first time he ever cried from happiness. Inside the house, framed photos lined the walls, not of yachts or awards, but of 3 smiling faces covered in ice cream, of snowmen with crooked scarves, of hands clasped tightly during a museum trip. The dining table bore the scars of craft nights, purple paint stains, glitter trapped in the wood grain, permanent marks of joy. He never considered replacing it. One evening, Lily came home with a drawing. It showed a house with 3 stick figures. Over their heads, our family. Sometimes he didn't even listen to the story, just the rhythm of her words, the miracle of her healing. Weekends were sacred. He turned off his phone, cooked breakfast, got flour in his hair, and didn't care. They built pillow forts and danced in pajamas. On Sundays, they visited the park. Lily always insisted on holding both his hands. Emma would race ahead, shouting for him to keep up. He always did. At night, he tucked them in. Every single night. It didn't matter if the company was on the verge of a billion-dollar merger. If they asked for one more story, he gave them 3. The girls still had hard days. Sometimes the shadows returned, and tears came without warning. But they didn't face them alone anymore. He was there, steady, warm, constant. And they weren't the only ones growing. Alex had learned how to say, "I love you," without hesitation. He said it at breakfast, before drop-off, and right before the lights went out. It always made the girls smile in their sleep. Every night ended the same. 2 small arms wrapped tightly around his waist. Soft whispers, always the same. "Good night, Daddy." And every night, standing there in the doorway, he whispered back, "I love you more than anything." He no longer chased what he thought he needed, no longer feared silence, because now silence was filled with peace. And his heart, once guarded behind walls of wealth, was finally open. He had gained everything the world said mattered, but it was in 2 broken little hearts that he found what truly did. Not in boardrooms, not in bank accounts, but in bedtime kisses, scraped knees, and tiny drawings with big words. Alexander Reid hadn't lost himself. He'd finally found himself. And in the laughter of two little girls, he found a reason to be more than just successful.
He found a reason to love again.